So we're here to talk about Kashubian folklore today. My name is Jeff Turkowski. I'm the director here at the museum. This production is presented by the Kashubian Cultural Institute and Polish Museum. This is kind of a part of a new history lecture series that will cover a little bit more broader aspects of the Kashubian people, Polish history, and really kind of dig into these things that are very well unknown. The Kashubian history has really been only available to the United States since 2004, with relationships really developing by 2014. So we only have about 10 years of studies that really go into this, using people's history all the way back to the 1900s, where they, were able to do cultural anthropology studies, but those studies haven't been available to the Western side of the world for all of this time. And so it's a pleasure to present this to you. There is no book that exists about this, unfortunately. And so this is kind of the only place that you can kind of find this information and go over the different aspects of the culture. Are you guys Kashubian as well, or what's the interest? Yeah.
I think so. I'm not even sure.
What's your last name?
Langowski, it was Langowski.
Probably
I'm
then
sure, yeah.
99%.
Yeah, probably.
So the first part of this is we're going to talk about Kashubian gods. And prior to Christianity, there was a pagan influence, a Slavic pagan influence in the north. But it's an intriguing aspect because the Kashubians are a combination of the original Baltic religion, the Wendish religion, and then your more Polish orientated Slavic influences as well. And so it's at the center point of all those different religions. And so we can see today that those religions or belief systems have, crossed through the centuries in order to still be around today. So you have to be, aware of this, melting pot of Slavic beliefs. And then kind of pick out where that might have come from, which is also pretty interesting because you can kind of track the movement of this early belief system and how people were moving around in the area and how those beliefs transpose from one family to another. And so this is a Slavic god. His name is Svetovit or Svetovid, depending on which language you speak. And he's the chief deity. This is very well practiced in Poland today. So this is also a Slavic god. It is said that he started the world by crying, actually, and it was unintentional. We came from, it's kind of interesting when you think about modern science, because his cries developed the primordial pool that all scientists believe that we have evolved from, which is kind of a crazy belief in itself, but that's what's accepted. And so there's multiple heads showing the multiple personalities of this god, but it is said that she or he does not care about humanity. The crying was an accident, the creation story was an accident, but there is no involvement in this deity in actual life. It's just the random creator of the world, depicted by often this three-headed figure that you see, or the one next to it is more common, the kind of crude looking three-headed wooden figure. And so you'll often see these deities posed through either stone craftwork or wood artwork, like chainsaw artwork, which is kind of one of the reasons I started putting the same kind of chainsaw artwork in the museum to show this early influence. It's also important to know that these populations did not Christianize until the 1500s or even later. They early on around 1140 started to tell the ruling class that, oh yeah, we're Christians. But what they were actually doing in their homes was continuing these traditions. And that's why today, if you go to Poland, you can go to these ceremonies and you can still drown the Morzana. You can still engage with these early deities. And it's become a part of Polish Catholic life versus simply pagan. And so it's interesting because we have a video that I show the kids, and it talks about their Christmas celebrations. And one of the most common comments about that video is they're like a normal American family, going to church, singing the regular songs that you sing. But then all of a sudden there's a turn and there's something weird going on. They're talking to animals. They have all these different beliefs. And those kind of still shine through. And so the Electioplaki Sunday, that's a Christmas wafer that's modeled after the development, the word escapes me now, the communion ceremony where you get your wafer. And so, in addition to giving the wafer to your family, the Kashubians would go and give it to all of their animals because they do believe that animals can talk and have this personality and all of these different things. And so that's kind of a part of that Slavic or early belief system. So I mentioned drowning or Morzana. This is a goddess associated with winter and death. She is drowned in late March, early May at the beginning of the spring season. And this still happens today. The kids will get together, they will create a Morzana, and then take a procession down to the river and still drown her. And what this symbolizes is that you're at the end of a season in which everybody is dying. So we have to, clear our minds a little bit of common technology. There's no refrigerators, there's no storage units. You basically try to put all of your stuff into an underground place, cover it with dirt, and that's like your refrigerator throughout the year. But towards the end of the spring, you're running out of those food reserves that you stored from the fall, and there's nothing to eat, there's nothing to gather. The mushrooms haven't come up yet, the strawberries aren't being produced yet. So you're running out of food during this time. And so what they would do in celebration or in recognition of that is that they would drown death. So it's a symbolic form that you're getting rid of the winter time in which all of the people are dying. And you are then welcoming in the new season when things start to grow. So very symbolic, but yet practical at the same time. You see all these people dying during the winter time before the beginning of spring. And so you just have this kind of celebration to go with that. But it is a clear representation of the cycle of nature and of life, and also understanding there is no technology. So you kind of explain things in this mythical way rather than with what's actually going on. The third individual here is Perkunatel. She's the thunder goddess. It's also important to notice here that most of the information that we have is documents that are written by priests that are visiting the area. And so we may not have a clear understanding of exactly what's going on. We also have the intermingling of deities. So they would bring the Roman influence and they would see this individual and they would go, well, this looks a lot like, Venus, or this looks a lot like some sort of Roman god. And so they often put those characteristics to fill in the blanks of things they didn't think to ask or understand themselves. So yeah, she is absorbed into Christianity, and it is very hard to distinguish between her and Mother Mary. And so this is often the same symbols are used in Catholic churches and stuff. And so you'll often see pictures and paintings of Mother Mary with these lightning bolts around her. And people don't often understand where that comes from. And it's because it's not actually Mary, it's Perkunatel, which is common with Catholic belief systems to kind of mold the two together in order to appease the population, but yet still provide that aspect of Christianity and religion. So it gets really interesting as we move forward on how all that works out. One of the most famous figures is the god of lightning. This is Perun or Perkunis in the north. And this character is very interesting. Like I said, they often blend religions together. And so this is the god of lightning. What other, Viking religion or Roman religion also has a god of thunder? So do we know that this is exactly how they portrayed it? We really don't, unfortunately. But we do know that there is Thor, there is Zeus, and all of these three figures are pretty much identical. And so what does that really mean for the Kashubian people? Where are these influences coming from? Is it Zeus that arrives from the Roman era? Because with new research, we do know that Romans were in Poland as north as Gdansk. with new discoveries in archaeology? Or is it from the Vikings, or is it something that they just created on their own and it's just coincidence that you have these gods of thunder all over the world during this time? And the answer we may never know, but it is interesting to consider. But this is the head god of the Baltic region and of the Polish region as well. So this is a shared belief system. I always warn people against kind of combining all of them together because it could be the same one or it could be very different. And there's very different aspects as to how they are celebrated as well, or how they're depicted in artwork and different things like that. But Perun you will find all over the place. And I talk more about him with the Tree of Life here in a minute. Jivana is the goddess of wilderness and hunting, and it's associated with the protection of animals in the forests. She represents the Kashubian respect for nature. And so Kashubians lived in this marshland, often hiding from the Teutonic Order or hiding from the Germans or hiding from the Polish people as well. And so they're very in tune with nature, very in tune with taking care of things. When I read this stuff, I often think of the Native Americans and how the Native Americans cultivated the land in the United States, burning the excess brush from underneath the forest to take care of it, and actually creating national parks like the one in California, and some of the ones that are around here. Even Winona itself was considered this very magical place that you needed to take care of. So they would come in and practice those environmental practices in order to keep and cultivate a beautiful landscape. Without those natives, we wouldn't have the national parks that we have today. And so this is kind of that veneration. And with this picture, I also wanted to mention there's an early movie out there and it's called The 13th Warrior. And it's kind of, it doesn't depict Kashubians in any positive light. In fact, they make us look very much like barbarians. But it is the bear people that live inside the mountain that are coming out and harassing and killing off this Christian village. And so they send these 13 warriors up to defeat them. And I always think it's just really hilarious because without doing the studies and just kind of making up this broad story, that's what they created, is these, you know, barbarians that like are almost demon possessed in the movie, going off and slaughtering people and stuff. And that just isn't necessarily true. Most of the deities and the way of life of these Slavic people is very connected with their surrounding and explanations for things that we didn't quite understand yet. And so that's where all of that kind of comes from. But those people look exactly like how she's dressed in the movie, so the bear outfit and everything. This would be the mother bear in that movie, with all of the village worshiping this individual. The next one, couldn't find a good picture for it, but it's the Goshk, and it's the god of the Baltic Sea, and the sea's king. So kind of like Triton or Poseidon of the ocean in the Roman mythology. And so he would often destroy ships, often be involved in taking over different battle scenes, helping the villagers overcome different types of things, and then a danger if you didn't please him as well. And so Yasterbog, or Easter god, is another interesting character. A good god of the spring and one of the most important gods to the Kashubians. He's ruling over their earthly nature, being a light bringer. So this is celebrated during the spring alongside Easter. This was celebrated before all of the other influences. This also depicts a part of the ceremony of the Easter basket, in which you would bring the basket of eggs, painted eggs or dyed eggs for the Kashubians. And then you would put other things with it, like horseradish sauce, butter, sausage, meat, sliced cold meats, all of those types of things. We create this bountiful basket and set it outside, and to hope to please this specific god that takes the form of a bunny or a rabbit. And the rabbit is the symbol of fertility, so that you can multiply your harvest for the next year, depending on the gift that you give and if it's accepted. Now, the gift is probably dragged off by a fox or a badger, but but you take that as a symbol that, you know, that he accepted your gift. So in America, we switched it around to where we get a basket from the Easter Bunny. But in Poland, even today, it is a gift to the Easter Bunny, to please this specific god. And Yaster, I think, is also a German Wendish belief as well. I don't know if I explained this really well, but if you look at a map of both Poland and Germany, half of Germany is still West Slavic tribes that are celebrating these types of things as well. So they're the Wends, and then the Slavs of Poland, and then the Baltic areas. It's all kind of combined in this history. And so you'll see Yaster in German mythology as well. But I warn people because there is no nationalism back then. There's no such thing as Germany. So what would they kind of adhere to? What kind of celebrations would they follow? Then it would just be the Wends, and the Wends are part of the Kashubian early religion, along with those other two. So it does go cross back and forth. That's often why the Christmas tree gets associated with Germany. Well, it's not necessarily German because it's not Saxon, Bavarian, or Thuringian, but it's these West Slavic tribes that live in modern day Germany that believe in this. And so they just call it German for the sake of the easy language. But it is the West Slavic people. Mokashka, the kind-hearted portion or patron goddess of women and girls. She was supervising or guiding each sex act, particularly those forbidden ones. And her main accessory was a spinning wheel, and women need to sacrifice scissors or wool to her. And so this is kind of no different than any kind of patron saint in the Catholic religion as well, with a little added twist of being involved in those kind of deeply intimate sex acts and stuff. And we'll get into a little bit why she's special with some other gods. But it's basically this idea that you can only celebrate or have babies at a certain time of the year. And this is done in the summertime. And we have to think that why would they do that? Why would they have these kinds of celebrations? Well, if you have a child in the middle of December or during the late spring, your child will not survive. There's not enough food for them. They're very weak at that time. They need all of this kinds of nourishment. And so you would actually time out your birthing process, which means you would time out the time in which you would conceive as well. And so there's an era of the summer in which these kinds of deities are celebrated because you're trying to prepare for this era of conceiving children. And so this is really hard for me to say. Kashubian is a god worshipped on the tops of the hills in the sacred groves. Again, this goes back to the nature aspect of things. She is one of the most important gods of the Kashubians, and not much is known about them, this particular deity. We do know that she exists. She's depicted in stone in northern Poland, and is responsible for the culture aspect. It's almost considered a crying god because you celebrate her when dark things happen. So when you're being invaded by the Germans or you're being invaded by the Poles, you would ask Kashubian to take care of that and to help you to ensure that your Kashubian religion moves forward. And this is also where the Dingus Day celebration comes in, where you would take the olive branch and you would whack your family members with this branch, or it's kind of a light tap. But what you're doing is you're actually brushing off the old or disease or any kind of affliction. You would be brushing off that affliction so that you'd be purified with this branch that you're being hit with. And so now that's tied to what they call Swingus Dingus Day in Poland. But originally it's a Kashubian activity in reverence of this deity flag, whatever it is. So that's where that all started. And so you can see a lot of these aspects will be tied in with modern celebrations that are still done today, but their original intention may be lost in translation or lost within the Catholic religion as well. So that's the general deity, the general god, the the deities that are celebrated in the Kashubian region. There's a lot more of these mythical creatures exist, and there's a lot more gods that exist. I just can't simply tie them to the Kashubian region. Specifically, they're more of a general belief system between one area and the other. So you'll hear about lots of different ones that come up. I think there's 27 in total that I know about. I just didn't want to put them all down here because they're celebrated all across Europe as well as in the Kashubian area. So whether or not that's been placed upon them or whether they actually celebrate it, I don't know at this point, but we do continue to study it. And so the first little mythical creature is the Eutrope. It's a humanoid demon, and it is causing the possession of all people. This is the reason that anybody acts outside of the normal standard. So anybody has maybe a mental disease, a mental illness of some sort, whether they're acting outright or not conforming to the general standards of how you're supposed to be. So if you were writing, for example, writing was considered to be holy. Once you write something, it becomes permanent, and therefore the writing then holds power. This is why you don't have much information about these deities, is because if you write something down, then it becomes permanent. And if it's permanent, then you're basically creating this godlike form of, it's basically like the beginning of the belief in an icon. So in the Kashubian region, if you create something on paper or you create a painting, then that becomes real. So when you see an icon of Mother Mary, that is not a painting of Mother Mary, that is actually Mother Mary. So distinguishing between the two is just not done. We see these paintings as they are real life. And so that's kind of part of the whole thing. And so this Zaxera is an evil witch that, like the demon, who steals children and smokes them alive in her hideout in the forest to eat their meat. Now, this is also Baba Yaga is a famous witch, or this character. But more or less what we're teaching our children with this particular story is not to go into the dark forests. And I often say that if you think about it in real time or in modern times with our current understanding, if you didn't want your children to go in the woods and get affected by poison ivy or poison oak, or run into the wolves or the bears that are in the forest, you would come up with these kinds of fantastical stories to create a lesson to teach your children, just like Mother Goose tales. So there's many of these that exist throughout the Kashubian and Slavic and Vendish populations to warn of dangers. And so more often than not, every one of these deities, that's what they're doing. Or they're creating a story to tell a real, to talk about a real issue that they may not understand yet. Because why would a plant give you a rash? Well, that's got to be a demon that comes and afflicts you versus catching something from the plant itself. Because we're not scientific yet. We don't have these answers. There is no studies that exist, no books that you can go grab. And so what does that look like? Well, you went into the woods where the witches are, and you came back all itchy and the rash. The Trazavid is another spirit or ghost that appears at night in the marshes, the Kashubian region, down here in Winona, and takes the shape of a man walking with a lantern. This individual has been found several times throughout historical stories, often depicted by soldiers in battle that tend to believe that what they're seeing is the death, what do we call him? The guy with the Sith and death.
Oh,
The
Grim Reaper.
The Grim Reaper, there we go. The Grim Reaper that's coming to take the souls of individual soldiers that have died to the Netherlands or to hell, wherever you want to kind of talk about it, whatever religion you choose. But it's an interesting aspect because the lantern is this guiding light that will travel through these dark marshes. And that can be explained in many different aspects, whether it's lightning bugs or somebody else that's just walking out there. But it does come up quite a bit in those stories of war. I kind of think it's a hallucination, but reading the documents, that's kind of what it looks like. These tired soldiers that are undergoing PTSD just have this explanation for what they're seeing out in the woods. The Mora Vishtashik, or the Bugzi, is a really interesting story, like, because it transcends not only from the past, but we have examples here in Winona specifically. This person was born covering on their head, such as a piece of the placenta. And so what I'm saying is that the placenta sac, you were born and you have a cap over your head, where the amniotic sac has formed around your head and does not stay in the woman's body. So you were born with it, and this is a symbol that you are a Vuji. Now, you're not going to be violent during your lifetime. Most of the time, you're going to have afflictions after your death. There's lots of myths about this individual, because the other aspect is they may be born with teeth. That may be another symbol that they're a Vuji. There's all of these different kind of signifiers during your lifetime, but that does not mean that you're going to, suck the blood. It's not a Bram Stoker's version of the vampire. This is, stolen from this story, with the addition, because Bram Stoker's version of the vampire is actually written to warn people about the Polish and Slavic influence in Europe as they're immigrating to Europe. And so Bram Stoker creates that story to scare people about these incoming immigrants because he doesn't want them there. And so he creates this fearful story to warn you against, people from Hungary or these Slavic regions coming and invading your country, because who knows if they're gonna start sucking your blood and killing off the population. The other aspect are, a piece of this is that if you're born with that cap over your head, the parents would then grind that down and dry it and then force the child to eat it. If you don't eat it, you can still be a Vuji down the road. And this is still practiced in some other third world countries, where they'll force the children to do this. Some people do it now just for the sake of the nutritional value. It's kind of weird, but people do it all the time. And so during their life, Moras can attack horses and choke humans at night. And so they never actually caught doing this. It's almost like an out of body experience when they're alive. But it gets really, I think they're more of a scapegoat for certain diseases like tuberculosis, cholera, even the Black Plague. They get the bad rap as for causing it all. And so they take that birth as a symbol that bad times are about to come. But after death, this individual takes a completely new form. It retains a lifelike color, and it does not decay inside the grave, which leads me to my Winona story. Because there's an individual who's a police officer. His name is Thomas Block. His children began dying in 1916 all the way to 1921. He loses a child every single year to, well, the records say tuberculosis. However, that's also during the time of the Spanish flu. So we don't know exactly if they were misdiagnosed or if it was just tuberculosis. But anyway, the village or the people, his neighbors that surrounded him, all convinced him that his daughter, the first one to die, Frances Block, was a Vuji, and that she was coming back and killing off the family first. And they wanted him to go up and dig up the body up at St. Mary's Cemetery to be able to determine if she was a vampire and do the proper ceremony, which is cutting off the head, placing it between the knees, and then putting a scythe over the body so that they cannot rise from the dead without running into the blade. So Thomas goes up to the cemetery. He digs up his daughter's body, realizes that it has been decayed, so she cannot be the vampire, puts a white cross over her lips and buries her back into the cemetery. The next night, he goes up because they want him to uncover the second child that died, Joseph Block, but they stopped by the police, by the other police members, and they say, I know there's not really a law that tells you can't do this, but could you not do this? And so they take him down, they convince him not to go. There's a huge investigation once the rest of the Irishmen and Germans find out in town. And they did ultimately define a law that states that you cannot go up and dig up these bodies, and stops this from happening in the future. There are plenty of examples. There's another vampire in Boston that's the same thing. But it's done right after the Pusta Noche, and we'll talk about that. But this character is very interlaced into these other celebrations, and we'll see her several other times. It's such a fascinating belief system. But there's two types of vampires, and the first one is a description of disease, right? What we're talking about is somebody having, say, the Black Plague. They come into the village and everybody dies. And so the first person is being blamed for that. The second type of vampire is a serial killer. And so in 1934 in Warsaw, we have another vampire that shows up, and this individual young boy, he's like 24, goes out and kills women every night in the same gruesome and bloody way. And so all of Warsaw is internationally scared of this vampire. They do find him, and then they try him and perform that ceremony where they remove his head. But what we're talking about is that a serial killer could not do this on his own. No human being could do things like this. So it must be a demonic figure that is possessing him and making him do these things, which to me, it's not necessarily so far off the mark. I don't know how anybody could do that kind of stuff. Another famous story, and probably the most famous for Kashubians, is the Stolen Vosges, or the fight of the Stolons. This is how the world was created, according to the Kashubians, is that these giant monsters were fighting in battle, and that's how all of the mountains are formed. That's how all the hills are formed, is their footprints and different aspects of this battle as they're rolling across the globe, creating all of the mountainsides, rivers, everything, but basically because these giants are fighting. And there's not much else to say about that. It's just an interesting story, on how they, lack of geology and lack of understanding of erosion and all these different things. They just explain it away with these giants. But you will find the giants now in Minnesota. There's 6 of them in, I think it's Detroit Lake or Lake Detroit Lake. And so they, in the forest up there, have put 6 of these stolons that you can go see today. And they're not necessarily Kashubian orientated, but they are modeled after these Kashubian giants. And so that's kind of, yeah. And I think some of them are made out of wood, some of them are made out of trash. But it's good. I'm really excited to go see them. I think they just finished, and you can now go and see them this summer. The Ormoskim Veju, or the sea serpent, is lives in the Baltic Sea. And all the things that you would associate yourself with sea monsters that you see on the old maps. But the interesting aspect of this one is that what they are actually describing is that this is celebrated and told in the month of March after the ice melts in the Baltic Sea, and they warn their children, you cannot go into the ocean because if you do, the sea serpent will come and grab you and they will drag you out to sea. Well, if you go into the Baltic region in the month of March, especially that little Gulf area below Hel and next to Putsk and above Gdansk, there's an extreme riptide that draws the water out of that Gulf. So if your children go into the sea in the month of March before waiting for it to really warm up, they will get dragged out to sea by this riptide. So again, another one of those fairy tale stories to teach your kids the dangers of nature and to explain that away. Another one is the Oserenok, or the Serenade mermaid. And she lives near the city of Gdynia, so same Baltic region. The mermaid has a story that goes along with it. So another one of these fairy tale Mother Goose tales about how the king calls for her help. And she helps the king defeat this invading German army by attacking the boats and drowning the individuals, luring them into the sea and then killing them off. and then she like puts a curse on him and drowns the attackers, all those types of things. But in the end, she tricks the king and brings the king out to the middle of the ocean, and then murders him as well. And so it's just this, kind of demonizing women a little bit, but I think it's just one of those stories that exist to scare people about the dangers of the ocean. Because more than not, these sea monsters are actually put on maps to describe actual dangers in the ocean. Corals that exist that will scrape the bottom of your boat and make you sink. That obviously wasn't something you couldn't see, like the coral under the water. It had to have been this mermaid to come and attack your boat, right? So that if you look on older maps and you juxtapose it on modern maps, what you'll find is that those sea monsters are overlaid in reefs, in rocks that are sticking up, or like the English Channel has one because of the currents. Older boats couldn't withstand those currents and would often tip over and sink. And so it's all explained away with these kind of mermaids. The Kashubian king is probably one of my favorites, the Król Kashubski. He lives inside of a mountain near the Kashubian region, which is very interesting because there's not a mountain next to the Kashubian region, so I have no idea where this is at. I really don't. I think the tallest place in all of Kashubia is like 500 meters tall. It's like 1,500 feet in the air. And it's very hilly and very forestry, but I think the nearest mountains have to be the Tatra Mountains of southern Poland. So I have no idea where this individual would have lived. But they do have several different stories where they reference this mountainous area. So I'm gonna have to do some more looking to find if there's anyone closer, but I do believe that it is the Tatra Mountains. So where this comes from, I have no idea. But he asked them to tell the Kashubian people that he had not forgotten them and that one day he will return and protect the Kashubian people. Then he gave the two men a golden ring as a token of his promise, and after the men left the mountain, they spread news about the king, and it brought much joy to the Kashubians. And I think what this is really doing is giving them hope during a time of extreme oppression from all sides of the world. And so the Germans are trying to take over land as early as the 900s. The Vikings influence from the north, and then the Russian or Russification processes with the Cossacks as well. This is giving hope to the Kashubian people. Don't despair. There is a king out there that will one day come back and provide revenge for you so that you can rule yourself again one day. I think that's why it's kept alive, because even today there is that message as well, that one day the Kashubians will be back on top and rule themselves. Another forest spirit is called the Leshi. The Leshi is a guardian of the woods. Leads travelers astray, so you're gonna get lost in the woods. It's the Leshi's fault, not your own. And he symbolizes the respect and fear of the untamed natural world. Again, this is also in reference to kind of the witches of the woods. But this is when you do not return from those woods, it is the Leshi's fault. He's the one that leads you astray, makes you get attacked by certain animals, getting lost in the woods, losing your way. That confusion feeling that you feel, that almost fearful feeling that you're lost, that is the Leshi. So it's a description of an emotion, which happens with lots of these deities as well. You can't have these feelings or you wouldn't be scared in the woods naturally. So it has to be somebody putting that on you as you wander through the woods lost until you find your way. So it's a pretty interesting aspect too, about how they're describing the natural world and the world around them. The Rusalka is a water nymph. This is also found in marshes and in lakes and in the oceans, but often associated with the dangerous allure they represent and the beauty and peril of nature. Now there's lots of configuration about what is actually going on here. There are arguments between scholars. Many believe that this is putting a danger on consummating or having children outside of the scheduled region. And so if you go off skinny dipping on your own with your lover, then this individual will prevent that from happening. And so again, I just think this is something we're telling our kids to keep them good so that they don't have babies in the winter time, and all those different types of things. The Boruta, a mythical figure, sometimes viewed as a demon, but oftentimes as a protector. The Kashubians have lots of these kind of troll-like or gnome-like figures, and so the Boruta is one of them. And basically, anytime anything happens that you wouldn't foresee, or these kind of events in your life like death or you know, even something good in your life doesn't happen naturally, this individual is responsible. And so you'll often see him depicted with beer, liquor, and basically hanging out in the distilleries all the time, getting wasted drunk. And then if you happen to run into him, you can have one of these things happen to you. The Boginki are spirits associated with children and the protection of infants. The Boginki are often depicted as benevolent entities, so they don't do anything, though they can turn malevolent or put curses upon you. They're neglected, embodying the delicate balance of life and the importance of respecting and appraising spiritual forces. And so while this doesn't actually engage with your lifetime, it's more of a guardian angel for your children. So it's this person that protects them, understanding that you could have around 17 to 18 kids in a lifetime, but only about 2 or 3 would survive. Mortality rates for children all the way back to before 1950, so not that long ago, was very, very high. And that's often why you had so many children, is because you wanted to make sure that you had a legacy survive. But all the way up to the age of 25, I think, if I remember correctly, it's only 11%. You have an 11% chance of making it to your 25th birthday. And so that's only changed with modern medicine and you know, modern nutritional levels. You know, being able to have access to food and those types of things is really what turned that corner. But prior to like 1950, it's only 11%, which isn't a very not very good odds, if you ask me. And the Mamuna is a forest spirit similar to the Leshy again, but often associated specifically with the marshes. And she is believed to mislead travelers, kidnap children, and symbolize the dangers of the marsh. Now, more than likely, this is something that happens if your kid goes out and gets stuck in the mud and drowns themselves. Different animals or creatures that live out in the marshes. Again, there's no technology, there's no roads, and so this could happen very easily, where you're out playing, and you think the water is only a few feet deep, you're going to take a bath or whatever it is, you get stuck, and that would be the Mamona that takes you. Again, 11% chance, you're dying of a lot of things. Yeah, and this is just explanations for those dangers. The Pavudnika, or the Lady of Midday, is a field spirit that appears during the hottest part of the day. Over the summers especially, what she is actually described as being is heat stroke, heat exhaustion, those types of illnesses. So this is an explanation again for another disease. We can explain most of these away with modern understandings, but back then this feeling would come over you, and you wouldn't really understand why. You'd be drinking water, you're just out in the hot sun, and maybe you don't even notice that it gets up to 100 degrees, but then you start baking, and that's the individual that's responsible for it. Not a medical condition, right? It's not something you can explain. This is another one that is pretty much one of my favorites. It's the Domobi, or the dwarfs. They all live inside of the house. They live inside the walls, beneath your floorboards. They live in the museum, inside these pipes, all those types of different places that they can hide. But what I think this is actually describing is that you're up all night, you're doing these celebrations and ceremonies that often require you to drink, especially in the Kashubian religion or culture. And then if you're up at 2 in the morning and you have your friends over and you're also singing Kashubian songs and you're dancing and you're drinking and you're loud, you tell your kids before they go to bed, hey, don't worry, you don't have to get up at night. You don't have to come check on us. It's just a demovie. And what will, so you can go back to sleep and rest easy. That way they didn't have to tell the children themselves, it's it's us that are up drinking. It's us that are up partying. We're drinking that ether wine that Kashubians made, which I don't know how you can drink straight ether. But that's what they invented and did very well. So while they're getting wasted and being loud and, eating magical mushrooms, whatever it is, it's the Demovie that's making all this noise. You don't have to check on us. And so that is the Demovie, especially comes around on those celebrations during the summer and winter that involve alcohol drinking. They're also involved in the Pusta Noche. They will come out for any deviant behavior that happens, or any destruction of the house that happens as the kids wake up in the morning and everything's trash and there's liquor bottles everywhere. Oh, that wasn't us, son. That was the Demovie. Oh, and the Strizga is a creature with vampiric traits, but this is not a Vuci, this is not a vampire. But it is described as a woman with 2 souls and 2 hearts, who becomes this individual upon her death. And then she terrorizes the living, symbolizing fears of the unknown and the concept of dual natures within individuals. And I think this is often described as your inner demon today. But this would be something that you would only come out after death, depending on your belief systems of who you were. But this is still, I think, one of those explanations that describes these massive massacres that happen during the Kashubians' belief system, especially the Teutonic Knights that came in and killed off 30,000 Kashubians in 1310. There was lots of these individuals that arose from that time period and haunted the Teutonic Order. And so this is their story. I can't explain that away because it's in the documents. The Teutonic Order is actually calling out and saying that the Kashubians are haunting them from these demonic people that believe in all this Slavic crazy stuff are coming and rising from the dead and messing with us. And so you'll often find pictures and statues of this, especially in the city of Malbork. In the largest castle in Europe, there's lots of these all over the walls. The Vila is another nymph-like creature associated with wind and storms, often depicted as a beautiful woman. They represent the unpredictable and powerful forces of nature. And so there's this idea that these things are the ones that create hailstorms, tornadoes, any kind of destructive force. But there is also the Trumerik. This is a male figure that the spirit's responsible for causing those storms and bad weather. But it's more so that this individual can create a thunderstorm out of thin air. And so you don't see it coming. It's one of those immediate type things that happens. And it reflects the Kashubian understanding of these powerful forces of nature. And this is kind of getting into the Pusta Noche ceremony. And so just recognize this for a minute, that this is the spirit of mourning and mourners. During the first 24 hours of somebody's death, an Odzilnik can steal your soul. So this leads into why we did the Pusta Noche ceremony, even in Winona, in the United States, is to prevent this from happening. And we'll get into that, right? So the Pusta Noche is the soul remains in the house for the first 24 hours after death. And so it will remain around that area. And so you have to go and warn all of the owner's animals because you don't want to disrupt or disturb the soul in any way. Doing so, it makes them susceptible to that Modzilnik character, and their soul could be stolen away from heaven or whatever the afterlife is, depending on the time period. And so you go through and you warn verbally the dogs, the cats, the horses, the cows, the chickens, the geese, the whole 9 yards, because you don't want them to get freaked out if they see the soul, because animals can see the souls and we cannot. But the Pusta Noche is done during the first night, so that first 24 hours. It's a pretty standard Catholic wake, traditionally done in the 1900s. It stops right around the 1920s when we begin to take that 24-hour period from the home away and start using mortuaries. But prior to this, it's pretty standard to have the body inside of a casket on display inside the home. But there's a separate aspect for the Kashubians, because what they do is all night long, that first 24 hours, you're not allowed to cry in front of the body. You're not allowed to have kind of any kind of emotional outbursts. So what they do is they drink excessively, singing Kashubian songs, having a good time inside the house. If you want to have those breakdowns, you have to go outside the house and cry. But nobody in the community is not allowed to be there. Everyone has to show up. So everyone in the parish community has to go to your house and you have to stay up all night long. There's only two exceptions. If you are elderly and cannot stay up all night long, and the children must go to bed, but you are required to drink coffee and straight liquor all night long until the morning hours. Once the 24-hour period is done, at 6 a.m. in the morning, whoever's sober enough to grab the body or the casket takes it outside to the carriage, and it's taken by the owner's own horses to the burial ground or to the church. It was first the burial ground, and then in the US it was actually taken to the church for the service, and then to the cemetery. But what you're actually doing here during the Pusta Noche ceremony also is looking for any changes in the body. If there's any pooling, any redness, any bruising that happens post-mortem, that is a symbol that it is a Vuchi, and she's going to rise from the dead and kill you. So in Boston in 1888, there's a newspaper article where the reporter is terrified out of his mind, has no idea what's going on. But this Kashubian culture comes down to the ceremony, and it looks at all normal. He basically is describing, how initially he didn't realize that anything weird was going to happen. But right at the end, the parishioners jump into the grave, remove the guy's head, put it in beneath his thing. They grab his sides and put it in the ground, and all of this commotion is going on because there's people that are watching that are not Kashubian, cannot speak with them because the language is different. And so they're absolutely terrified about what's going on. But what they're doing is preventing that Vuchi from rising to the dead and killing the rest of the community. So this is a multifaceted aspect of the Kashubian population, and is proven to still have continued like into the 1960s. Though I think, well, and then later there's a couple in the 80s and 90s as well. But they're slowly dying out, and different aspects of it have changed over the year, taking out the Modzilnik aspect, taking out the vampire aspect, to just doing this traditional celebration all night long, or a party, if you will. And I've heard many Kashubians still in the region say that they will have this ceremony performed at the end of their life. Again, taking out all those Slavic pieces and just really drinking all night until the morning and taking the body down, protecting the soul for 24 hours. And I don't believe it's purgatory that they're being dragged off to. I do believe that it's a permanent situation in which you're dragged off to hell by that individual Modzilnik. Trying to be cognizant of your time, so I'll try and speed up here. There's so many of these. Like I said, I couldn't put them all in. We'd be here all day. But there's Vishkonka, and that is the special Easter tradition involving the blessing of the food baskets. I think I described this to you earlier, but this is the picture of what those original Easter baskets would look like, with the butter, the bread, the eggs, and the different aspects. And so you would give that to the Easter bunny. Another ceremony is the Forefathers' Eve, or Jazadi. This ancestral veneration ritual where Kashubians honor the spirits of their ancestors and offer and prayers reflecting their deep respect for lineage in the past. So this is a kind of the terminology that we use around here is there's three important values: faith, family, and community. So this is that aspect of family where you celebrate your ancestors. Ancestral recognition, or spending time in genealogy and all that stuff is very Kashubian, to respect those people that have come before you. And so this is a day and a celebration specifically done for that. And so it's like the day of genealogy, if you will. And people still come in and do it today when they come in and see their family histories on the Dizadi Day. I don't know if they know that that's an original Slavic association or not, but I do have families that schedule this day specifically to come and venerate their ancestors. Or we'll talk about it if it's not specifically on that day, that's what they're doing. I've even considered picking this up because I think it's really cool to just, kind of look back and realize where we came from and just how different it is from the rest of the world.
Is that like on a specific day every year,
Mhm.
the same day every year?
Yep. I can't tell you what day, I know it's in the summer, it's in July somewhere, but it's on our calendar on the museum website. And so Kupala night is another celebration going back to having having sex during the summer times and timing out your birthing pattern. This is the night that you do it. And so it's, yeah. It's 2 days long. The first is the Kupala night. You start with the celebration. All the women in the village would create these flower headdresses that they would then put into the river on the following day. During this time, you would pick out your partner and you would have to jump over this bonfire. Holding hands while you do so. If your hands broke during your jump for any reason, you were not a good match. And had to choose somebody else or be alone for that year, whatever the types of things. But this is also celebrating fire, water, herbal magic rituals, and that symbolic purification and fertility. It's kind of a preparation for the next night, which is the Noche the Pupavi. And it's the midsummer celebration. Today, those headdresses that are made the day before would be taken down to the river. They would be put into the river, they would be carried off by the river, and then all the boys in the village would jump into the river, and whoever gets your wreath would be then the one that you're supposed to spend the rest of your life with. And so again, it's like there's a priest that comes into the area, and this is a Baltic ceremony that transposed itself into Slavic beliefs, but the Balts would basically have this specialized night, and this priest comes into the area during this time, and he says everybody acted like they were possessed because it was normal village lifestyle. And then all of a sudden night hit and everybody's walking around naked, everybody's skinny dipping in the river. I mean, like a massive well, I guess there's no better word for it, but a massive like orgy in the whole village. And that's what they were doing, is they were consummating and trying to have kids on that day. Because if you do it in this day in August, 9 months later, you're having your baby in the springtime after the Morzana is drowned and has a better chance of surviving. And then it has the whole summer to gain nutrition and really become healthy before the next winter. And so this is all timed out in those beliefs. And that's pretty much how that went. And so you can see that all of these celebrations, well, they have their own unique, like mythical or magical type background, really do describe something very practical. And I think that's the ultimate point of this lecture, is that we even do this today, where we try and explain things that we don't understand with these kind of magical experiences. And now, with Hollywood and TV, we make it seem like these ancient people were stupid or ignorant or whatever it is, but it's very practical living. And they always have a reason behind it. There's always a purpose for what's going on. And if you dig deeper than just that magical story, you can find that there is usually a very practical purpose for these types of things. And then once science and technology and understanding, it takes the magic away, and we kind of find a new, something else or another way to explain. But other than that, I think it's very fascinating to go into the region and to see these kind of magical characters still being depicted all over the place. Paganism is on the rise in Poland after Soviet depression for so long. And so there's even specific churches in Kashubia that only talk about these individuals, celebrate these celebrations. There's churches in Warsaw that do the Slavic versions of these stories. So it's still very much alive. Lithuania, on the other hand, never stopped. They were never really Christianized, even when King Aegeon married Queen Jadwiga of Poland and he became the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. They never did adapt Catholicism. And so there's original Baltic and Slavic villages that study this and still venerate this. And so you can go see the original Tree of Life. The Tree of Life is over 10,000 years old. It has been tested. It is that old. It is giant. And it actually has modern support systems to keep it from falling over. Because I don't think it would fit in this room. It would not. It's that wide with lots of branches and different things. And it's depicted in ancient drawings and different things like that. But it is fascinating to learn and to accept that there are these types of things in the United States that are happening. And that culture did transpose itself into another country with immigration. So I think it's interesting, or one of the reasons I put this out is because that Thomas Bloch's story in specifically is written 4 times in the local newspaper, and they never consider the fact that it was a Kashubian cultural piece that was happening. Trying to understand it, they just use the term vampire to sell papers or whatever it is, but don't actually understand what they're talking about. And so the last time that was printed was in 2021. And they still were not adding the fact that it's the Kashubian cultural piece, which drives me as a historian crazy because you have to get your facts right and you have to understand what's going on. This is not something they picked out of a book and they're all of a sudden playing like it's a vampire because they're too stupid to know the difference between a book and a real story. This is a very deep, culturally rich experience that they're going through, and that aspect of it should be corrected. So they've been notified now. Other than that, and past your time here, do you guys have any questions? Anything at all? If you do have any other questions or anybody online has any questions, you can always email me, grab my card on your way out and I'd be more than happy to help you out with that. And that's pretty much the end of the show. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope it was informative and you got something out of it. And there will be more to come. I am planning on putting this into the museum a little bit to explain those types of aspects, and so that we can get just a little bit of a more and better understanding of who our ancestors were, who the Kashubians were, and why they're so special and unique and deserving of continuing their story into the future. And that's it.
Thank you.